Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on employee well-being. My name is Hamsaz Wadwani. I'm the Chief Executive of the Seventh Fold and going to moderate this discussion today. So before I actually introduce the panelists to you, I wanted to set the context. So the context for today's panel discussion was going to be the insights from the Seventh Fold Wellbeing Survey that we had conducted. So let me just first take few minutes, first 3-4 minutes to share with you some of the insights, and then we go right deeper into discussing about them. Just give me a minute. All right. So the Seventh Fold, just to give a quick brief, is an organization that I founded about 2.5 years back. We do a lot of work in the HR and well-being space. In the well-being space, we do complete end-to-end work, right from diagnostics to well-being interventions to holistic wellness plans, fitness plans, retreats, of course, EAP services, webinars, those are the common ones. And we're the only official partners for the Science of Happiness intervention, which started in UK. And basically, it is an intervention which helps to improve the happiness quotients of employees. We also do work in the HR, more in the space of culture, gender diversity, and I also work as a shared CHRO for a couple of startups and small organizations. So that's just a quick brief to tell you all about the Seventh Fold, giving you all insights about the survey, because this was something very interesting. This is the second year that we ran the survey. And what we found was when it came to employee well-being, this year we looked at holistic well-being. We looked at physical well-being, emotional well-being, cognitive, social, which overall it kind of, is the mental health per se, if you can call it that, and financial well-being. So we looked at all of these different areas of well-being, and no surprise that emotional well-being was the poorest, followed by physical well-being in the study. What we also found interesting was that the well-being was different for genders. So if you see here, women showed a poorer well-being, whether it came to emotional health, cognitive health, social, and physical health. Only financial health was something where women sort of were better off than men. So this was one fact that we will deliberate a bit more in this discussion as to what can organizations do about this. The other interesting insight was on the well-being by generation that we found was that the Gen Z typically had a much poorer well-being as compared with the Gen X, Gen Y, or the baby boomers for that matter. In fact, the biggest difference was in cognitive health. Almost 33% of the Gen Z said that they find it difficult to concentrate on tasks. They find it difficult to make decisions. So again, this is something that we will debate on a little bit. And some other insights were that the poorest score that organizations got was on this point. It is easy to talk about mental health issues in my organization, which means that while organizations are putting in a lot of effort to improve the employee well-being benefits, etc., there is still a lot of stigma associated with mental health. In fact, in a lot of places, still mental health is confused with mental illnesses, and thus the taboo sort of continues, because this was the worst rated statement across the employee base. 28% of employees reported that they were bullied. Now that again is a very, very stark figure. 9% reported being harassed. And obviously we know that these figures are directly related with well-being. There are several studies that show this. 82% of employees reported that their productivity was low on most days. And again, this was a very shocking number even for us. So it is a very clear indication that if organizations want to improve their productivity, they need to look at this. If they work on well-being, they can probably change 82% of their employees' productivity. 60% of employees reported that they worked on holidays and leave, and 50% work for more than 55 hours in a week. And again, what we saw is that those who worked more than 55 hours a week, not only did their well-being drop, but their productivity also dropped. And the last part was the most important, which was when we ran a regression, we saw that well-being was able to actually predict the performance at work by 15%. So again, if organizations were to work around well-being, there would be a clear 15% gain in productivity. So these are just some quick insights. Of course, the report is very exhaustive. Those who have registered, we will email the full report to you. If you've not registered, you can go on our website and download it for free. Okay, so that's just some quick context setting. Would like to now get into introducing our very esteemed panelists. So we've got a very interesting, diverse set of panelists here. To begin with, Sangeeta Chandran. She is the head of well-being and safety at TCS. She also is the global head of TCS Cares. And I'm personally very impressed with the work that TCS Cares does. And even the team, I mean, I work with the team at TCS Cares, and there are a bunch of very passionate individuals with a great combination of HR and psychology. And I think that starts from Sangeeta herself, who is a certified counseling therapist. She also runs an initiative called the Dandelion Talk, which spreads awareness about mental health, emotional health, etc. She's actually also a member of various industry bodies in our country related to well-being. So that's about Sangeeta. Vaijayanti Nayak is our other panelist. Vaijayanti Nayak has 30+ years of experience across HR. She has worked as a head of HR with HDFC Chubb. She was a head of HR with ICICI Securities. Post that, she moved to ICICI Bank, where she was in charge of the capability building, leadership development, etc. She's even dabbled into entrepreneurship. And now she's with Axis Bank, where she heads the HR for the wholesale banking, as well as she heads the DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion function for Axis Bank. And I know Axis Bank does some pretty interesting work in the DEI space under her leadership. The third person is Dr. Shishir Palsapure. He's a psychologist himself, but honestly, he's been my guru because I've learned psychotherapy from him. Actually, a lot of psychotherapists and psychologists across the country have learned from him, because his institute that he founded, the Morphic Minds, it's one of the largest institutes that sort of trains mental health professionals. He also takes care of a program called CORE. He founded that, which teaches education specifically in terms of social and emotional skills to children in schools. Again, something that is super important. And another interesting fact is he has a fabulous sense of humor. Okay, and our last panelist, Mr. Sunil Mudgal. He is somebody who started off again with 25 years plus experience, started off working in HR for some marquee companies like IBM, GE. He was the HR director at Deutsche Bank. And subsequently, he did an interesting thing. He moved into the business side. He worked as an advisor with Bridge I2I Analytics, and he is sort of involved in talent analytics. Again, a very hot and interesting topic. And he also has his own consulting firm called Metamorph Advisors. And he also volunteers at a firm called Arushi India. So that's everything about our panelists today. I'm sure you agree with me that they're all sort of accomplished experts in their own fields, and all sort of come together to talk about employee well-being today. So let us begin with the discussion. Sangeeta, I would like to start off with you. Is employee well-being having any mind share with the business and CXOs, or is it just an agenda with the HR? Is it something that sort of they look at as uh, being a driver to even improve productivity, performance, or is it just sort of a, okay, we have EAP or we are doing some yoga session and that is what well-being is all about?
Well, you've like sort of put the cat amongst the pigeons right from the beginning, Hamsaz. And I think this is really the most burning question around well-being or any other initiative, because I think it's really important for anything that we do to ultimately merge or delve with the organizational goals. So if well-being, merges with organizational goals, then it'll succeed, right? That's what it is. I think before the pandemic, we probably had a situation like what you spoke of earlier, that, oh, you have many things, they're really good. Some of it is excellent for brand as well, for the employee brand as well. But how many of them really do the business leaders look at? And I would say that I think the pandemic sort of changed that entire story. And well-being definitely found its seat at the table, at the top table, and it's being discussed by everybody right up to the board levels. So it's definitely something that is important. I think what is important now, post pandemic, when everybody's attention is going back to looking at how to build the business, how to bring people back into the workplace, is to ensure that we are able to keep the well-being agenda and change the requirements and change the focus in what we do to ensure that employees benefit and they also are able to, stay in line with what the organization needs, right? So that I think is the way forward. And if organizations are able to do that, if we as well-being professionals are able to convince leadership about how we can do that, then we will succeed. I think at the moment we are doing quite a good job. As we move forward, we'll have to see.
Right. No, but absolutely rightly said. Till we don't sort of link it with the organization goals, it may sort of be very activity-driven initiative rather than a sort of a stronger initiative to take on. Sunil, what are your views on this? I mean, being on the business side, are there specific challenges that you face to really consider employee well-being as important?
Thanks, Samsaz, and thanks again for giving us the opportunity to be here. I couldn't agree more with what Sangeeta spoke about, but I think if I look at what specifically the wave 2 brought forward, it was one of the most difficult phase for the country as a whole, and it impacted the lives and families much closer to each one of us, right? And it was at that point in time where I personally had to deal with a lot of colleagues who had either their parents or their siblings or somebody in the family struggling to survive. A few lost their parents and siblings as well in the process, and that was pretty much an eye opener for a lot of people in the organization to say, how do I create a space where people are comfortable talking about the grief that they are going through, people are comfortable talking about the threats that I was facing, both emotionally, mentally, physically, as well as financially, I would say, because all of this had come together, and there was people, despite having the means, I could not really get a hospital bed, for example. So I think it multitude of issues were hitting employees across the board. And then there was also an expectation on the work front that people need to be seen to be productive, right? This is also a time where work from home was seen as oh, today you want to take a break, might as well have applied for a leave rather than saying I want to work from home. So I think while it was now beginning to be more acceptable, but it was still something where people had to prove that, I'm sitting on my desk for 14 hours. I am working hard because I needed to prove a point that, I'm not gallivanting or trying to fit in. So I think there were, like I said, there's a multitude of issues which were grappling the individuals. And this is where the reality also started to hit home very clearly. The difference here was it hit people across the board. There was no levels, there was no seniority or no gender or any other biases which were left on their own. So I think that way it was a big leveler, but it was also a big eye opener in terms of saying, as an ecosystem, have I created enough around me that gives me the comfort when I need to land upon? So I think it did impact in a big way. It has opened new ways of thinking, new ways of life, which I think the organizations are still coming to terms with. Because I think if I look at the next hot topic, it is hybrid versus work from home or return to office.
Yeah.
I think we don't have the right answer yet.
Okay, thanks, Sunil, for sharing some of those obviously challenges that I think each organization had to deal with at that point in time, and individuals individually had to deal with a very tough time. So, Shishir, I would like to ask you this question now, that what we've seen in the survey as well, that some of those factors like depression, anxiety, which were sort of, which showed a spike at the beginning of the pandemic, had improved towards when we are like coming out of the pandemic towards the end of 2021. So the cases of depression, anxiety, anger issues, etc. had dropped, but what increased was the stress. Stress clearly showed a very high percentage of employees reported that they were stressed at work. And obviously we saw a lot of those working hours and all of those things that, I shared earlier. Is this something similar that you've also experienced in terms of, your practice? How are you looking at the stress aspect amongst employees that has spiked?
If you're talking about the practice aspect, the patients have suddenly surged in terms of, initially they were not so much because of practical problems that they were not able to come to us. But after the lockdowns have been lifted, I am seeing a huge surge in patients with stress, also with depression and anxiety, and specifically children and adolescents are affected. And I am with World Health Organization about this, that it is going to be very, very bad for the next 10 years. So even after the pandemic is over, we are going to see the repercussions for the next 1 decade at least. So there are many reasons for that. With the pandemic, people's resilience has gone down. Their physical health is affected because their overall movements have come down. So they are not moving as much as they should be. They are not exercising. There has been cumulative problems. For instance, one financial loss or a professional loss, losing a job would have implications on their finances and then would have implications on their relationships and so on. So a cumulative effect, and it's not just going to recover immediately without the support of organizations and mental health professionals. So this is going to get worse, not going to recover immediately. So this is what my take on this is. The stress is going to go up in the coming few years.
Okay. Okay, that doesn't sound very good, but right, we have to deal with it, and I think resilience is the word, clearly. Vaijanti, what do you feel about this? What can organizations do, knowing that there is more stress? What is it that organizations can do?
Yeah, hi Hamsaz, and thank you for inviting me to this fantastic panel. Like we discussed earlier, that I am not a psychologist by training, but I love to observe human behavior. And indeed, this entire pandemic actually has been like a massive social experience, right? At micro level and at macro level, because, stuff is going around inside you, within your teams, within your organization, within society as a whole. So if you see, I think that, and I heard it from Sangeeta earlier, that in the entire pandemic, actually, this whole concept of well-being, which also includes mental well-being, I think kind of came center stage probably for the first time, right? Because you really had an issue at hand, and even at Axis. So, we have this whole bouquet of services called With You, which signals to an employee that don't worry, it is a tough time. We acknowledge it's a tough time, and we'll do whatever it takes to help you manage this difficult period. Now, that of course includes several, what I'll say, infrastructure related support. I mean, you do need to give actual physical support during the pandemic. But the other part, and since we're talking of stress, this leads to this whole emotional well-being or mental well-being. I think the challenge for organizations is really to normalize conversations around it. Right today, I think even today, people really tiptoe around this subject and are shy. I think, which is one of the reasons that we actually, over the last 1 year, we instituted an in-person counseling service. And I'm telling you that we've seen a steady offtake of people who take up their services, which means that people want to share. And I think creating these, what I call, these are artifacts, right? So the minute you appoint a counselor of this nature, you offer safe spaces, right? You change the language around well-being. I think this signals to employees that it's okay to, kind of talk about it. But I can only say one thing, Hamsa, that this is just the beginning of the journey, because there is still a lot of stigma, even in the minds of the employee. Shall I speak about it? What will it do to me? What will happen to my own personal standing in the team? So there are many things, and it's going to be a tough journey. But I think the first step, which is you got to normalize conversations, and what I think organizations do, and which is what we've tried to do. So we've instituted a wellness policy. So you can also signal to employees, right? The minute you say we have a wellness policy, and we're probably one of the only Indian private sector banks that has this kind of a policy, it tells people that this issue is important to the organization, right? So, I think it's both culture, policy that go hand in hand. And you can have the most enabling policies, but if the ecosystem doesn't support, then the policy cannot deliver. So I guess organizations really have to work both on the cultural aspect, which is a long journey ahead, and of course policy, which is more in our control, which we can then introduce and talk about it, evangelize it, which is what we are trying to do. But yeah, I mean, there is lots that needs to be done. I can only say that we've just begun the journey. But I see, at least from an employee side, some interest in availing of these services. That to me is a signal that, yeah, maybe, the road ahead, will be brighter.
Right. So Sangeeta, I would like your view as well on this. This whole martyr culture that we have, where working very long hours and working on holidays, etc., is considered, virtue, and people take pride in it sometimes, that I have never taken a single day of holiday, etc. There's also a lot of, as we saw, bullying and harassment sort of numbers that came out. So what are the things that organizations can do about these triggers?
So, Msaz, I think, we are beginning to see a shift in the way we view work and the way we view work-life balance and things like that. I think it is coming from both sides, top down as well as bottom up. Because I think now, employees are very clear about wanting to have certain boundaries around what they need, and they're pushing for it. So, and there will be times when, of course, work will be, there'll be high pressure, but as long as they're willing to put in, from time to time, they're willing to put that in, they do rightfully feel that, they have the right to have a right kind of a balance with work, with home. I think, which is one of the reasons why, everybody's asking for a hybrid sort of a way of working over the long term, and, if we can sort of settle into that, right? One more thing which I just wanted to pick up from what Vaijayanti said about, the culture, and how we are developing a culture of openness, and how we create that environment where people feel safe about expressing the fact that they're not doing all right and that they need help. And also if they are going through times where they believe that either colleagues or managers or people are pushing too hard, or any of that sort of, that pressure is becoming too much, right? So we have this thing called OHCs, our occupational health centers, and over there we have doctors who come to visit, and people are obviously line up to meet the doctor to get whatever help and they need from the doctor. We also have a counselor room in the OHC, and over the years, I can tell you that it is really interesting. I went to one of the OHCs recently, and just like there are people waiting to meet the doctor outside his room, there are people who are sitting outside the counselor's room and waiting. And I just thought that was incredible, because the fact that they have no trouble being sitting outside the counselor's room, probably sitting with each other and exchanging whatever mini counseling sessions with each other, for all you know. And that I thought is really the paradigm shift. So ever since we started even TCS Cares, we started TCS Cares in 2018, and we had an EAP service before that at TCS for so many years. We were one of the clearly one of the first people in the country to even have that. But the way the conversation has changed, that's really interesting. And the fact that now we have awareness sessions for HR, sensitization sessions for managers, that really helps create a culture of empathy within the organization. And again, this is not only meant to be top down, right? Just like leaders need to understand their people and empathize with them, people are also told that leaders are human beings. So when there are certain hard decisions which are taken, they're not clearly only to be seen as something that is somebody's out to get me, but it is a larger context of the organization and the needs of the organization, right? So I think some of that is beginning to happen, and during the pandemic it really, of course, increased a lot, because so much of focus was put on emotional well-being, and on every aspect of well-being, because each one of them are linked with each other, right? So I think that shift has definitely happened in terms of each person, the way they see well-being, and the organization, the way we view things around well-being of our people, or just basic empathy, respect, for each other, which is equally important, right, in the culture, to create that so that people feel safe, people feel like they have a voice, and that voice can be expressed without repercussions around that. So I think, yes, definitely strides have been made. Having said that, people are people, and there will always be one step forward, I think it's better to say 2 steps forward and 1 step back, rather than 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I think that's where we are right now.
Right. No, and I think what you said was very important about also including and educating HR and managers, because yes, of course, policies, etc., like Vaijayanti said, that are critical, but at the end of the day, to make sure that they are implemented effectively, and there is an ethos that also is there in the organization, the HR and managers also play a very key role for this. Sunil, what are your views on this in terms of the overall culture bit? How can that be enabled so that employee well-being improves?
So I think a lot has been covered. I'll just add to what has already been shared, is that most of the organizations, for a change, started to look at well-being beyond the employee and extending it to the family members as well, right? I think what that started to do it, make it more real, because like I said, during the pandemic, people were touched more closer home than ever, right? So it was not just about being sympathetic to somebody else's situation. Here I was also going through, in some shape or form, similar emotions, similar experiences. And that's where, when most of the organizations started to bring EAP into purview, it was extended across the board, which also meant that, if I or somebody in the family is going through, I become more empathetic to rest of my team members. It could be my peers, my subordinates, including my bosses. So I think a bit of a stigma has gone. And Dr. Shishir was talking about, or Dr. Sangeeta also mentioned the fact that today it is okay to line up outside a counselor's room. But, I roll back 25 years when I was studying. I used to go to Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital in Delhi, and it was a taboo, right, to be seen sitting outside a counselor's office. So I think things have changed, but pandemic just hastened a few of these transformations and acceptance across the communities.
Right. No, absolutely. I think the process has accelerated in terms of just the awareness and the sheer openness, especially I feel amongst the Gen Z. I feel they're a lot more open about it. So Shishir, I would like you to talk a little bit about this gender difference that you saw. Why do you think that is, and what is it that probably organizations can do about it?
If we see gender differences, not only in organizations, but if we see specific psychological challenges, we see many psychological challenges are more common in women, and a few psychological challenges are more common in men. So, but there is always a gender difference, and some psychological problems are equal in both the genders. If we talk about depression, anxiety, women are more prone to these problems, and there are various reasons for that. And I think one of the primary reasons is the societal structure we have, is women still get a secondary position in the society. And second is, they go through a chemical upheaval, the ups and downs throughout the life. And even small changes in the body chemicals can have a huge impact on your mood. But that also predisposes them to more psychological challenges. So that is why we would see the same, levels of psychological challenges in organizations and in general population as well. What was the second question about that?
So what do you think organizations should do? Should they have separate policies for women, practices for women?
I do not think that there should be separate policies. However, there could be similar policies. The context could be anything. For instance, the policies have changed over many years as well. For instance, now we have paternity leaves as well, right? Now, this is a welcome move. So there should be specific policies made for a large umbrella. Does not have to be, let us say that one psychological problem is more common in men and only men would get that benefit. No, it's not so. Another problem is more common in women, so women get that benefit. But we could have a broad umbrella under which the contexts could be different, but the policies could include a large group of psychological challenges. And this way, there won't be any discrimination. At the same time, we will be including these problems and be able to do something about them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. As in, sort of, it's difficult to create different policies from that perspective. So Vaijanti, your views being in DI, what do you feel? How should we look at this from the lens of gender? Should we actually look at it from that perspective at all?
Yeah, sure. So, I think if you see what's happened during the pandemic, and at least that's been our experience, at least people I've spoken to in the industry also resonate with it, is that women attrition has actually gone up more than men. And, what shall I say, the odd thing was that everybody thought that because it will be largely work from home, it could be more convenient, but actually that's not necessarily been the case with everybody. So I think women have, borne the brunt of more housework, childcare, elder care, along with a job. And what happens sometimes in work from home is that the boundary between work and home just kind of blurs, right? And just because it's very accessible, we also tend to work longer, really longer hours. That is also a reality. That's us as people. So clearly that impact has been felt, so now how do we work at this? And that's something that, we, as a bank, because we're committed to creating a truly diverse workforce, and we are concerned about it, and we, are looking to see what kind of interventions will really work for women. So it's not about giving different policies, right? So for example, our adoption policy actually covers any parent. It's not a woman, even a man can claim leave under the adoption policy, so on and so forth. But I think as a bank, what we're working on is figuring out what are those engagement pieces, that create stickiness to a company, if you see it from the lens of the gender. And a lot of work on the gender, I think initially at least, has been dependent on the woman's personal life cycle or life stage. But our view, and women who've left us have also tell us that women are also creatures of ambition. And they want growth, they want more compensation, they want to be counted. And, I think if we make small changes in the way we manage people, and this is really then brings to this whole point about inclusion and belongingness, and which is the well-being aspect, actually well-being, rather than look on it as emotional stress, but generating a sense of well-being, a sense of being counted. I think if we do that, right, those are the things that will really help. So some of the women tell us that, wherever they have felt a continuous communication from the supervisors, they felt supported, and they have felt a sense of belonging, and that has allowed them to ride and weather the storms. And that's how they have continued to stay with us. So I think one part is policy making, but the other part is our everyday behaviors. How do we engage with different people? Are we, providing opportunities to the same set of people? Are we looking at people differently? Are we going with stereotypes? So on and so forth. So I think that work with managers, we definitely need to do a lot. And honestly, I also feel what the pandemic did was, it robbed a lot of social capital away. I mean, organizations are networks of relationships, right? We can have tons of systems and processes, but people run them. And somewhere that perhaps came in the way, right? So it's about also rebuilding that connect, rebuilding that capital, really getting to know people better. People as in whether you look on them from a diversity lens, which is gender, you can look at it from a ageism lens, you can look at it from a PWD, or whichever lens you want to look at it. But really, is my communication, is my engagement catering to the needs of all of these people? Because that's what we hear from people, right? A continuous flow of communication that keeps up engagement, that shows I'm cared for and I'm supported for. That builds wellness, that builds resiliences, I guess. And that's what we got to work on.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that our survey also saw was that those people who were completely working from home, their social health, they scored very poorly, obviously because of the sheer lack of engagement, like you mentioned. So that does take a toll on their own well-being. Shishir, I'd like to come to you again to ask you about the Gen Z this time. I mean, we see those who are, in the typically 25 years and lower age gap, which, form the employee base for a lot of organizations. How do their well-being overall has been quite different than the Gen X and Gen Y. We also saw that their coping mechanisms, they were using a lot of negative coping mechanisms, whether it was binge eating, binge watching YouTube, sort of binge drinking, etc., as versus what the Gen X, Gen Y were doing. So what has been your experience in dealing with this population and their well-being?
Yes, my experience has been consistently similar with the Gen Z. Is because there are many problems with or I would say that there are quite a few challenges that Gen Z faces. They are in their younger age groups, and this is a transition time. This is a time when they have to focus on their relationships, they have to focus on their earning, they have to focus on their professional career. They have to focus on their bodies, their appearance. So all these things fall at the same time, right? So there are multiple stressors with this generation. What we also see that since I would say since the internet or the technological boom, we have seen that the total screen time has gone up, specifically with the younger generation. And with this screen time, their coping mechanisms have reduced because their overall interaction, real interaction with people has reduced. Although the internet offers and social media does offer quite a lot of benefit, that it becomes a good buffer for them, for a lot of people who do not have the courage or probably have the privilege to talk to people in general and in real. But it has also played havoc on their sleep time. So their coping mechanisms, their overall social buffers have gone down. And I think that's why their total stress has gone up because of decreased sleep, increase in alcohol and other substance use. Now, that's a very sensitive topic again, but a very important one. So we can see that there are behavioral addictions, there are substance addictions, and there is sleep deprivation, plus unhealthy eating. I'm not saying that all the younger generations, the Gen Z, do that, but we see that these are definitely there. And that's why we can see their indices of mental health are pretty poor, right? So whether they are in the generation, whether they're in the organizations or in general public, I see a very similar trend with them. In fact, majority of my clients are from the Gen Z, so they are younger than 25, and it's painful to see that very young people at their most productive and formative years of life go through challenges that have an impact throughout their life. Not only it has an impact, the mental health has an impact on all the areas of life at that moment, their relationship, their finances, their profession, their physical health, but also has a long lasting impact throughout their life. So I think we need to focus, including the organizations need to focus on the Gen Z, that they are not only the pillars, but they're also the future of any organization. So we need to focus a lot on them.
Right. They definitely are the future. So, Sangeeta, your views on this? I'm sure TCS has a huge population of Gen Z. What can organizations do about this fact?
So, Hamzaz, I absolutely agree with Dr. Shishir that, this generation, there's so many stressors that they have to deal with. And I have a slightly different view on, one of the reasons why their resilience is so low. Right. So if you really look at the way our generations, past generations were, some of us came from a generation where we didn't have it all. We had to strive for some of the things. That was the culture at that time. That was the accepted norm. That was how parenting was done, right? And nothing was ever just handed over to you, right? And then after that came the next generation. Maybe I think we are the generation we should take a little bit of the blame for that, I think, because we came into a life where the country opened up, the world opened up, the world became a beautiful place. It was a global village. Everything was sweet, happy, and our defenses were down. So there was sweetness, the need to need to prepare somebody for war wasn't required. Everybody lived in the global village, right? So the ethos that we began to see and began to enjoy is what we decided to pass on to our children. And we did not put them through difficult times. We did not put them through challenges. We gave them whatever they wanted because that was the world we saw. We didn't feel the need to prepare them in that way. But unfortunately, the world that they now have inherited is a world which is completely topsy-turvy. And it's got wars, it's got pandemics, it's got complications of social media. It's got so many different things which they're dealing with, which they don't know how to grapple with because they were not prepared for it. So that is my view on one of the biggest reasons for resilience. And I'm really passionate about this, and especially because, Dr. Shishir was talking about working with children. I also work now with children on that level, to say that I want parents to understand that they need to build resilient children now. And we need to teach parents, and we need to make them aware of the fact that how do you bring up resilient children, because that they're going to have to do that, right? So that is one. Coming to TCS, and where we already have a population of children who have now grown up and are supposed to be adults and may not yet be quite ready for adulthood because of the way they were brought up. Absolutely. I think, once they come to the workplace, we do have to work with them. We have to train, we have to retrain them into understanding how to be more resilient, how to be more adaptable, right? Because that is what the world demands now. And to do that, how do we do that? We can't throw them into a cold pool of water, because that's really not going to be productive. That's definitely going to be counterproductive. So how do we do that gently? How do we do that slowly, with a little bit of reward, with a little bit of consequence, and what we would have probably done when they were much younger, to do that now at adulthood. So organizations are going to have to sort of restructure the way we train our people, restructure the way we roll out communication, the way we interact with each other, the way we coach them to be really wholesome human beings in the organizational context. And further, that is what I think is the role now for HR, for leadership, for well-being, for all of us. I think that is what we need to do.
Right. No, I completely agree. The key takeaway here for me is the whole building resilience and starting early, if possible, when they're with children at that age itself, so that
Absolutely.
we're able to sort of create more resilient employees in the long run. So, okay, thanks, Sangeeta, for sharing that. Sunil, like you mentioned, the other topic about, should we bring employees back to work, or should they work from home? Should they be remote? How is this decision taken from a business perspective here? As in, what we saw in our survey was that employees were not really, while we hear in the news that employees now want to continue with work from home, but what we've seen is that women preferred the hybrid mode actually, and men wanted to work from office. So even the well-being of people who are working from home was not better than those working in a hybrid model. So are we looking at this well-being aspect while we are taking this decision about whether employees should come back to work or not?
So the way I'm looking at it, and Sangeeta, Vajanti can comment, it is less about gender, more about generation, right? So I think people who are in the 2+ decades of experience, they continue to feel that, if I don't see you on a daily basis, I don't know where exactly are you spending your time. And you as an employee come back and tell me I've been very busy, I'm stretching, but I don't see the output. But when I talk to the employees, irrespective of gender, I think the generation today is basically saying, you need to trust me, you need to hold me responsible and accountable, and do not micromanage me, right? I need coaches today who will give me a nudge at the right time, rather than managers who are sitting at my desk and saying, tell me what all you have done. It is no longer an activity orientation that the employees are looking for, versus saying, hold me accountable for a larger purpose in life, right? And I think with the choices also available, because today, if I look at it, at least this generation is still able to practice idealism to an extent where I don't need to necessarily join a large company to earn a livelihood, right? People are more happier saying, as long as I can survive, and to be associated with a larger purpose, I'm more happy being in that state of mind. So I think the values of what is important is changing drastically. So to force somebody to say return to office because that's what the leadership team is comfortable with is definitely not going to work. It has to be an inclusive decision. And also, I think it is about holding people accountable for outcomes rather than the means to get to that outcome, right? So I think, and that's where I read a very interesting article that, the hybrid work is going to expect the managers to be coaches rather than continue to manage people by activities or manage people by goals in that sense. So I think that's definitely a change which we need to manage, but it is more about adapting to that change than trying to force fit something. It is also about, I think it is also bringing up another debate onto the table, which is, it is not just hybrid, but it is flexible work arrangements. Because people are more and more saying that, again, hold me accountable for the role, responsibilities, and the outcomes which are expected. Now, some people want to just do a couple of hours of work early morning, late nights, and I want my afternoons free for myself. I think that's the other flexibility which people are talking about. And that's where, more and more organizations are starting to talk about, can we have core work hours? So at least we know if there is collaboration that needs to be done, when can I reach out to somebody that I need to work with? So I think the whole design of workplace, it is going through a massive transformation, and that's where future of work kind of organizations are spending a lot of research in coming up with what would be the right model on a go forward basis.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil, for that. Vaijanti, what are your views on this? How can we create, like you said, more trust amongst the employees, creating that flexibility, which I think you and I also talked about earlier. How can organizations do that?
Yeah, so I think that two of the things that he said, I completely agree with, which is, flexibility and adaptability, because the world of work is indeed changing, right? But I think one of the things that I do want to say, and there's so much talk about the importance of the manager or the leader, right? But I guess a lot of work needs to happen in that area from an institutional standpoint, because they have dealt with people in a particular way, and now suddenly the expectations are different, right? Suddenly you have to be more an empathetic leader. You have to be a coach. You've got to manage on output, not on input. But we got to retool them also. I mean, it's one thing to say you are central to the success and then not retool them. So I think a lot of work needs to happen there. That is one thought that, I have. The second is also this whole thing about young people leading young people that I see happening in some of the teams, right? So you have, the millennials who are now getting into like mid-management leadership positions, and then the Gen Z. And, how do they relate to each other? How do they manage each other? I think there is a lot of learning that we can do. Now, when it comes to flexibility is the key. I guess, in an ideal world, you want to tailor make for every person, and personalization, hyper personalization is what that is. But let's say in a regulated industry like banking, right? I mean, where you are an essential service, there is no other alternative for people but to go to the branches and service their customers every day. But even there, what we've tried to do is, in our central office or corporate office, we have adopted a hybrid model. So we call it the 2D, 3D model, which means, 2 days a week, you got to go to office, which is about collaboration, networking, build your relationship capital, and 3 days you can work from home. Now that also needs adapting to, not just by the managers, but also by the employee themselves, right? If I'm used to being micromanaged in a particular way, and that's how I've led my life, now suddenly I'm like on my own. And in fact, the demands therefore become different. I have to show impact and outcome. I can't only do activity. So I guess what I can say, Hamsaz, is a lot of learning from all sides, but I definitely feel one area, which is we got to equip the manager with the right resources. It's one thing to say you are the key, you got to change, or you manage a sense of inclusion, belongingness, well-being, resilience, but we have to retool them. We have to help them to retool. I think that is where the big opportunity to my mind really lies.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Vajanti, for those inputs. I completely agree with that. And I'm sure all the people in the audience as well agree that that is the way forward for most organizations. So I know we're running a little behind time, but very quick, if I could go across all the panelists, if there are any afterthoughts, if there are any things that you want to talk about in terms of future of employee well-being or some good practices that our viewers can adapt, etc. So if we can just go across all the panelists very quickly, Dr. Shishir.
I think what I would propose is a proactive approach towards mental health rather than addressing problems as they arise. It is well established fact that mental health problems can be prevented, right? So, and we have an interesting research that $1 spent in prevention saves $37 for any organization. So I think spend a lot of time and resources into preventing these problems rather than addressing them when they have already appeared. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Sangeeta.
Yeah, so I think, what we found, especially during the pandemic, is that, around well-being, there's so many different things that we did around well-being, whether it was physical well-being or social well-being or financial well-being, emotional well-being. And we realized that, all these are interconnected and they all need to be looked at in one glance under one roof. And that is what I think is really important, that we see well-being in a very holistic perspective. So, linking your physical health to your emotional and mental health, linking your social well-being to everything else, as well as ensuring that you're financially stable and flourishing there as well. So there are so many different aspects. And now that we've done this, we really see that the fruits of that are much more. So it's not 2 + 2 = 4, but it's so much more. And I think that would be a great way for all of us to look at well-being.
Thanks. Thank you, Sangeeta, for that. Sunil, what are your views?
Since Shishir and Sangeeta spoke about the organizational bit, I will focus on the individual. I would say that, I as an individual need to continue to invest in emotional bank balance, build my network that I can leverage when I need to. And also, all problems are not available on Google. Gone are the days where, I just needed to have a cup of tea. I just walk across to Sangeeta and say, okay, let's just chat. Is it good weather or not? How are kids at home? How is family doing? I think those conversations, while may seem trivial, but they are very, very critical part of who we are as human beings. And I think we need to continue to invest in some of those conversations to also broaden our perspective and horizon.
Okay. Vajanti?
Yeah. No, so what actually I learned from, the work that we've been doing over the last several months has been, I think, if we want to really build resilience or build well-being or create a sense of, respect within the organization, I think we have to learn really as an institution, as people, as leaders and managers to really listen very, very deeply. Because I think that's really, really the trick. What is being said, and oftentimes what's not being said, right? And the other is, I learn to accept others, and more importantly, I learn to accept myself. I think unless I begin the journey of self-love, going to self-esteem, I don't think I will reach this place of being truly at peace with myself and appreciate what I am and what I bring to the table. So I think, these are my thoughts. It is something that the organization can do and must do, which is really about building deep listening skills, building empathy down the line. And as a person, I must learn, to be okay with myself, warts and all, because to be human is to have flaws. And one of my ex-colleagues would say, I'm flawsome. So I think getting people to be like that, those are the few words that I have to say.
Very nicely said, Vajanti. Yeah, flossom is a very interesting word. Okay, so I think I have several takeaways from this panel discussion. From Sangeeta, I think the whole holistic well-being part, the importance of that. I think what Shishir mentioned in terms of preventive care from a well-being perspective becoming more important. From Sunil about the whole flexibility that needs to be sort of available, and Vajanti from you about training the managers and providing them with the tools to deal with this whole huge change. These are just some of the few takeaways. I know there are whole hosts of takeaways that we have. I know are running a little behind time, but we had a couple of questions that are that people had posted on our social media. If anyone from here has a question as well, please do put up in the Q&A section. But I will just probably ask those at this point in time. One was from an architect who basically wanted to know that considering well-being is so important, what are the sort of future-ready workplaces that can really sort of focus on well-being? Is there something that that architects can look at? I don't know which one of you probably want to answer that. Does it matter, the living spaces for employees, the working spaces?
I can take that. We are actually in the middle of finalizing an office. So one of the things that is in discussion is, the ratio of workstations to collab spaces, right? So gone are the days where you will have continuous workstations. So today we are looking at almost a 1:1 ratio between a workspace versus collab space, because you are wanting to give flexibility to people the way they would want to work, come together and discuss, rather than have more formal spaces that need to be created. So I think that's one learning that we have at this point in time.
Okay. The other question that we had was on attrition. We had a question whether attrition is somewhere linked to well-being, as in, can well-being then be an early warning sign or a early warning signal of attrition? And this person was specifically talking about new joinee attrition, which is sort of spiked in a lot of organizations. So Sangeeta or Vajanti, probably one of you could take this question, I think.
Sure. So, I think right now, certainly, I think well-being is linked to attrition. Well-being is linked to productivity. And, especially with newer people, younger people, I think they're right now at a stage where they're exploring the various opportunities. They're also at a stage where they haven't yet developed, strong linkages with the organizations that they've joined. I think, one of the reasons why many organizations do want people to come back into the workspace is so that we're able to actually build that culture of belongingness, right? So I think because of that, definitely you have people who will try it without too much of thought around that. And I think, if you notice that people are certainly looking at what are organizations offering in the well-being space when they want to join. So if you see, when young people join, some of the questions that they want, that they ask, what are your basic things, like what are your HIS policies, what kind of benefits do you offer, what kind of leave policies do you have, what kind of, so there's so many of these things that they really, really care about now. And I think that's something which is now here to stay, because without that, and that really is contributing to the employee brand as well, right? So definitely, I think it is linked. I just think that, I think younger people joining newly need to give themselves a little bit of time to develop, develop or grow roots to some extent before they decide whether a place is right for them or not. I think that is one cautionary message that I would have, because otherwise, it's very easy to be a rolling stone and they will not gather any mass, and that might might be so. I know we are talking about, new ways of being employed and gigs and all that, but there is value to human connection, as Sunil was saying, and I think we need to remember that.
Yeah, thanks, Sangeeta. So I think we don't have any further question. We could probably end the panel discussion. I truly thank each of you for being part of this. And a wholehearted thanks to all of you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.